Have you ever wondered if someone living thousands of years ago could see everything happening in our world today? The battles raging across the Middle East, the threats flying across borders, the fragile peace that could shatter at any second. One prophet saw it all. His name was Isaiah, and what he wrote wasn't just ancient history. It was a warning sealed in time, waiting for this very moment to be opened. Think about this. The conflict between Israel and Iran dominating every news headline was already written on ancient scrolls before Rome even existed. The armies gathering, the cries of war, the siege of Jerusalem. This isn't just politics, it's part of a prophetic pattern described with shocking accuracy. Why did people call Isaiah the prophet of the final days? Why are his predictions so precise that even skeptics can't ignore them? And here's the big question. If he saw how this conflict would start, what did he know about how it will end? You're about to go on a journey that could completely change how you understand the Bible and history. Get ready, because what you're hearing isn't just an old story. It's a divine message that has traveled through time to reach us right now. Before we go any further, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. It helps us keep bringing you these forgotten truths. Your support means everything. What if Isaiah didn't just see the rise and fall of empires, but saw the exact moment when Israel would become the center of a worldwide crisis? What if he left us clues about how it all begins and how it all ends? This isn't coincidence. What you're about to discover will take your breath away. By the end of this story, you'll never look at war and faith the same way again. The temple was almost deserted, too early for morning prayers, too late for the night watch. In that strange hour when guards dozed against the pillars and birds hadn't yet started singing, Isaiah entered in total silence. His footsteps echoed across the courtyard, each sound questioning whether he had the right to be there. He stopped at the altar's edge and closed his eyes. For a moment, all he could smell was cold stone and oil from old offerings. Nothing in that dawn suggested what was about to happen. Not the wind in the corridors, not the creaking beams overhead. The world seemed locked in its routine until the presence appeared. Isaiah felt it first as warmth in his chest, so sudden his heart raced like it wanted to escape his body. He tried to open his eyes, but the brightness burned. Then he fell to his knees, not by choice, but because his legs couldn't hold him anymore. "Isaiah," said the voice. It wasn't a sound traveling through air. It was a vibration coming from within, echoing in every cell, every fear, every hope. "Son of Amoz, listen." The prophet pressed his hands to his chest. Tears started falling, though he couldn't tell if it was terror or something deeper. "Lord," he whispered through sobs, "what do you want from me?" The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Then the voice spoke again. "Today I'm setting your destiny apart from other men. Your eyes will see what they refuse to see. Your mouth will speak what they can't bear to hear." Isaiah trembled. Deep inside, he knew nothing would ever be simple again. Those who see the heart of the ages never come back unchanged. "I'm only dust," he whispered. "My lips are unclean, I'm not worthy." Intense light flooded the temple. Every column looked like it was made of flame. Every curtain moved without wind. And then he saw them, beings without human names, with wings covering their faces and feet, singing a melody that split the air into flashes of brilliance. "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." The floor shook, the doors groaned, and Isaiah's heart seemed to break, not in despair, but in an amazement so complete that no pride remained. One of the beings flew to the altar. With tongs, it took a live coal and approached him. Its heat cut through the distance like a blade. Isaiah wanted to pull back, but couldn't move a single muscle. "Your sin will be removed," said the voice. "Your guilt will be taken away." The coal touched his mouth. The fire burned not just flesh. It consumed every doubt, every limitation, everything Isaiah had been before that instant. When it stopped, he fell forward, catching himself on his palms. He breathed like someone surfacing from a dive too deep. Then, for the first time, he dared to lift his face. The light had softened, but was no less real. "Whom shall I send?" said the voice. "Who will go for us?" The silence was complete, a silence that seemed to measure the cost of freedom. Then Isaiah knew that moment sealed everything, the past, the present, and all that would come after. Even without strength, even without understanding, he whispered, "Here I am, send me." The wings withdrew. The light faded to gentle clarity. The temple, which had seemed to shake, was now calm, but Isaiah would never be the same. Behind a column, a priest who had woken in time to glimpse part of the vision fell to his knees, eyes wide, mouth open without voice. "What did you see?" he murmured. "Why does your face shine like that?" Isaiah took a deep breath. His voice came out steadier than it had ever been. "I saw the glory that holds up the world," he said, "and I heard the call that cannot be disobeyed." The man lowered his gaze, unable to bear the weight of that certainty. Isaiah rose slowly. Each step felt firmer than before. He knew many wouldn't believe him. He knew he would face mockery, threats, exile, but he also knew none of that mattered. When you've heard the voice of the Eternal, you owe no more explanations to men. That day, when he left the temple, the sun was rising over Jerusalem, but no dawn could ever rival what he carried in his heart, and what he had seen would mark all generations. No one who heard his words could ever pretend not to know. The sun rose slowly over Jerusalem. The first light touched the rooftops, bathing the ancient walls in gold, but no brightness could chase away the shadow gathering in people's hearts. The whole city seemed to be holding its breath. Some rushed to strengthen the gates, others lined up at the wells, filling jars with water, and some just sat on their doorsteps, staring at the horizon with exhaustion that had no name. Isaiah walked slowly, his cloak stirring up dust with every step. His gaze didn't just see towers and newly driven beams. He saw deeper. He saw something no one else seemed willing to face. At the valley gate, a group of elders was gathered, debating in tense voices. "If we accept their terms, maybe they'll spare our lives," said one, striking his staff against the ground. "We can't sacrifice an entire generation because of pride." "If we surrender," another shot back, his forehead marked with deep lines, "we'll be slaves forever. There will be no Jerusalem." "There will be none either way," said a third in a voice so low it sounded like confessing a sin. "Don't you see the signs?" Isaiah stopped beside them. His silence alone was enough to kill the whispers. One by one, the men lifted their faces. None dared speak first. "You're not just debating your defense," he said at last. "You're debating your hearts, because it's not only the siege of men threatening you. It's the judgment of the Most High, who will weigh each soul like wheat on the thrashing floor." The eldest elder lifted his chin, trying to keep his dignity. "Then is there nothing we can do?" Isaiah looked at him with eyes that seemed to see through flesh. "You could have listened before," he replied without hatred in his tone, while there was still time to choose humility over arrogance. When the temple doors opened not just for rituals, but for true repentance. The man lowered his gaze, unable to bear the weight of those words. One of the younger men dared to raise his voice. "But now, is there any hope at all?" Isaiah sighed. The wind carried the bitter smell of fires burning outside the walls. "For those who fear the name," he said, "there's always hope. But for those who think they can deceive the judge, not even a memory will remain." He continued walking. Every street seemed to hold memories, victories sung in psalms, pacts betrayed in secret chambers, children born without knowing they inherited a debt that was never theirs. Jerusalem wasn't just stone upon stone. It was a living record of everything people had chosen to love more than truth. When he passed through the market, he saw a few stalls still open. A merchant was laying out fabrics before customers who pretended to be interested. "They're from Tyre," the man declared, his voice strained with forced cheer. "Who knows if tomorrow we'll have any of this at all?" Isaiah stopped a few paces away. The merchant turned, and for an instant their eyes met. The smile died on the man's lips. Without a word from anyone, he lowered his head and closed his bundle. There was no bargain, no sale, no treaty that could postpone what was coming. On the northern wall, the captain of the guard watched the enemy camp. The rows of tents multiplied like weeds. The sounds of hammers and iron announced siege engines taking shape. Seeing Isaiah approach, the captain took a deep breath. "Prophet," he said in a restrained tone, "have you come to check our defenses?" Isaiah placed his hand on the stone parapet. His fingers felt the cold and roughness, as if all of Jerusalem was summed up in that wall, strong, but not eternal. "No," he replied, "I came to see how much faith remains inside." The captain didn't answer. He followed Isaiah's gaze to the horizon. Then he lowered his voice. "You know we won't win, don't you?" Isaiah didn't turn. "No, you won't win, because victory doesn't belong to those who trust only in walls." A heavy silence fell. The wind stirred the banners. Enemy torches flickered like watchful eyes. Then the captain whispered, "Are we already condemned?" Isaiah finally turned. His eyes weren't harsh, but carried an ancient sorrow. "Condemned, no," he said, "but weighed and found wanting." At dusk, Isaiah walked down the street by the water gate. Women washed clothes in silence. Children played, unaware that every laugh was a precious moment before the storm. He stopped and took a deep breath. He saw it again. The siege wasn't only made of spears and walls. It was made of pride, of denial, of hardened hearts. And so he knew Jerusalem hung suspended in time, between the chance for repentance and the edge of ruin. Every man, every woman had to decide. When the last glow of day died on the temple's summit, Isaiah lowered his face. No one there was ready to accept it, not even those who claimed to believe. The hills around Jerusalem seemed to rest in silence, but behind every stone, watchful eyes searched. Assyrian spies moved along the trails, looking for any sign of weakness. Yet in the heart of the city, a different battle was unfolding, a struggle against forgetting. In a narrow room lit only by a small lamp, 3 men leaned over a low table. The oldest scribe ran his fingers across parchment scrolls as if saying goodbye to a son. "We must hide them today," he said, his voice breaking. "When they start looting, nothing will be left intact." The youngest swallowed hard, glancing at the walls. Fear was so thick it seemed to have weight. "If they find us, they'll accuse us of treason," he said. "They'll say we kept prophecies against the king." The third man, his face lined and hands stained with ink, looked up. Something serene showed in his expression. "The words don't belong to the king," he replied, "nor to us. They belong to the one who spoke through Isaiah." In the corner of the room, Isaiah watched in silence. The last days had drained almost all the strength from his body, but his eyes burned with a flame that neither exhaustion nor threat could put out. "Write," he ordered calmly, "and when you finish, take everything. Hide it where no one dares to look." The younger scribe wet his pen and began to copy. Every stroke felt more final than the last. Every letter a spark of something even he didn't fully understand. "Behold, the Lord stretches out his hand against the nations. Behold, pride shall be consumed like straw." The other 2 bent over new scrolls, whispering each sentence so no syllable would be lost. Sweat dripped from their brows. Even there, in the dimness, they felt each word was alive, and that one day it would become fire upon sleeping consciences. When the work was done, the eldest rolled up the scrolls with trembling hands. "Will it be enough?" he murmured, "or should we take other texts too?" Isaiah placed a hand on his shoulder, with a tenderness no prophetic tone could erase. "Take what your arms can carry," he said. "The rest God will keep as he always has." The men gathered the scrolls in leather bags. Before leaving, they turned to him. "And you," the young scribe asked, "won't you come with us?" Isaiah shook his head. "I am what was spoken, and wherever I am, the word will be." No one dared insist. Night fell over Jerusalem like a linen veil. The gates were locked, the guards doubled, but no one noticed three figures slipping across the stone path with the careful steps of men carrying more than they could afford to lose. They crossed the valley and climbed through cracks in the slope until they reached a small cave. There, among twisted roots and cold stones, the scribes laid down the scrolls one by one. The eldest knelt. His fingers rested on the smooth leather. "O God," he whispered, "guard these words as you guard your own faithfulness." The wind blew through the opening, lifting grains of sand that stuck to the tears on his face. "Why do we hide what should be read by everyone?" the youngest asked, his voice breaking. "Why must the truth be buried?" The elder lifted his chin. His eyes shone in the darkness. "Because the fire that consumes lies doesn't destroy what is pure," he said. "But some can't bear to see that fire now." As they returned, Isaiah remained in the temple. His breath came in short gasps. He knew he wouldn't live to see the day those scrolls were found. But he also knew that when that day came, no one could claim ignorance. The eldest scribe arrived last. He stopped before Isaiah, hands empty. "We did as you commanded," he said. "They're safely hidden." Isaiah nodded, exhausted. "And one day," he murmured, "they'll set more than parchment ablaze. They'll set hearts on fire." The man lowered his gaze. "And if they're forgotten?" Isaiah raised his eyes to the temple's ceiling, where a crack let in the pale light of stars. "Neither fire nor exile nor time can put out what God ignites," he said. "The flame will remain, waiting for the generation that will have the courage to read it." That night, while enemy armies beat their war drums, few knew that the most dangerous flame wasn't in the walls or weapons. It was hidden, wrapped in leather, sleeping in the darkness of a cave. And even if years, centuries, empires passed, one day it would awaken. One day it would set sleeping consciences ablaze, revealing everything people had tried to silence. If this story is speaking to your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. It helps us reach more people with these powerful truths. Don't skip this. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now let's continue with Isaiah's prophetic journey. The smell of smoke came long before anyone could see it. Long before any man reached the gates of Samaria, the wind carried the bitter smell of destruction. The hills that once held vineyards and fig trees were now carpets of ash. Among the shattered walls, a silence lingered, the kind that remains when all hope has already been burned away. Isaiah walked slowly over the rubble. His stained cloak dragged black dust that clung to his feet. Beside him, two disciples tried not to look at the bodies curled in the shadows of walls. But he didn't look away. He knew that only those who can witness judgment without flinching can speak of restoration without hypocrisy. He stopped beside a stone that had fallen from the wall. On it, part of an inscription was still visible, "The Fortress of the Kings of Israel." Isaiah passed his palm over the scorched surface. It felt as if he could hear echoes of ancient voices, generals boasting of victories, merchants swearing endless prosperity, priests who had forgotten whom they were meant to honor. Samaria didn't fall because of military weakness, he said without turning. It fell because it forgot the one who gave it every stone of this wall. The younger disciple took a deep breath, trying to hold back his nausea. "Master," he whispered, "all of this, was it inevitable?" Isaiah lowered his chin. When he spoke, his voice held no anger, only the gravity of someone who no longer expects to be understood. "Inevitable only if pride wasn't torn out," he said. "Because when a city makes arrogance its wall, the Eternal will show that no stone remains standing." The older disciple knelt and touched the blackened ground. "And Jerusalem," he asked, Will it be any different? Isaiah turned slowly. His eyes, red with exhaustion and compassion, glimmered in the warm dawn light. If it listens, yes, he replied. But no one seems willing to listen until their own walls are falling. As he spoke, men with covered faces searched the rubble for anything that could still be sold or buried. Children followed behind them, gathering broken pottery pieces, fragments of scorched cloth, the last crumbs of a life that no longer existed. Isaiah walked down what had once been a marketplace. The arches were twisted, houses opened like mouths screaming without sound. At one point, he found an old man sitting on a pile of bricks. His eyes were dry, staring at nothing. "What do you see, old one?" the prophet asked. The man slowly lifted his chin. When he spoke, it was as if he were remembering every moment of a nightmare. "I came looking for my son," he said, "but all I found was this." He opened his hand. In his palm lay a broken amulet, small, useless, powerless. Isaiah looked at the object, then lifted his eyes to the old man. "What you trusted in didn't save you," he said, "but your soul can still be saved." The man didn't answer. He pressed the amulet to his chest and lowered his head. Sometimes pain is still more comfortable than repentance. In the afternoon, Isaiah gathered those who followed him. Between broken columns of an old portico, he raised his voice. "Listen, remnant of Israel," he cried. "What your eyes see here is only a mirror. If Jerusalem walks the same path, it will drink from the same cup." A murmur ran through the group. Some looked away. Others shook their heads in silent protest. It was hard to accept that glory could end in ashes. Easier to believe this was just the bad luck of a neighboring city. "Don't be deceived," Isaiah continued. "No city is so high it can't be brought low. No people so prosperous they can't be humbled." The young disciple stepped closer, eyes full of tears. "But if everything is so fragile," he said, voice breaking, "why did God give us walls? Why did he let us prosper?" Isaiah placed his hand on the young man's shoulder. The gesture was so gentle, the boy shivered. "Because he hopes for gratitude and humility," he replied. "But when he receives pride and injustice instead, the same favor that raised you up is the favor that will be taken away." Behind them, a half-burned tower groaned in the wind. With a dry crack, part of it collapsed. Dust rose like a veil over the witnesses. When the cloud settled, no one dared to speak. The sun was beginning to set when Isaiah turned his eyes toward Jerusalem, visible in the distance. Its walls shone in the evening light, as if declaring to the world that nothing could happen there. "I see pride," he murmured. "I see arrogance. I see the same seed that grew here." The elder scribe recorded every word. His pen trembled and tears fell onto the parchment. "And will there be ruin there too?" he asked. Isaiah took a deep breath. When he answered, his voice was almost a lament. "There will be," he said, "but there will also be opportunity, because restoration only comes after brokenness." On the horizon, Jerusalem gleamed, suspended in the illusion of its own invulnerability. And soon the neighboring city would taste the same judgment, never imagining that the flame-consuming Samaria was already burning at its own gates. The gray sky seemed to press down on the whole land. Not a single ray of light pierced the thick blanket of clouds gathering in the north. The wind brought a strange chill, as if each gust were the breath of something ancient waking up. Isaiah climbed alone to the highest point of Jerusalem's wall. His disciples waited below, afraid to follow. Up there, the wind seemed to have a voice. Each blast whispered warnings that only he dared to hear. He took a deep breath, sensing the smell of damp earth that comes before a storm. Then he raised his arms, and his voice split the still air. "Hear, O Damascus," he shouted. "Thus says the Lord, Damascus will cease to be a city and will become a heap of ruins." The words hung over the city. Everyone who heard them froze. One of the guards watching the gate turned to another man. "Has he gone mad?" he murmured. "Who dares to proclaim the end of such an ancient city?" The other remained silent. He only looked at the horizon where the clouds grew, and a shiver climbed his spine. Isaiah lowered his arms. He closed his eyes as if gathering strength. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but even more determined. "The pride of Aram will fall. Its palaces will turn to dust. Its warriors will scatter like leaves before the wind." Thunder boomed in the north, so loud the walls trembled. Many took it for coincidence. Others saw it as confirmation. A scribe ran to the base of the tower, carrying scrolls and a pen already wet with ink. "Master," he called, breathless, "repeat the words, we must record them." Isaiah opened his eyes. His gaze reached across distances no one else could measure. "Write," he said. "Behold, the Lord declares, the fortress of Ephraim will vanish. The kingdom of Damascus will disappear like a mirage." The scribe wrote down every syllable, hands shaking. When he finished, he lifted his face. "Why us?" he asked. "Why are we the ones who must carry these words?" Isaiah turned slowly. There was both tenderness and sorrow in his expression. "Because someone must bear witness," he said, "so that one day when all is fulfilled, no one will say, 'We were not warned.'" That night, as Jerusalem prepared for the watch, some men set out toward the north. They had heard Isaiah's proclamation and wanted to see for themselves if Damascus was truly threatened. For many days they returned with nothing but rumors. The city remained standing, its gates open, its markets full. The generals of Aram laughed at the news from Judah. "What kind of prophet predicts ruin where there's only prosperity?" they mocked. "Who dares imagine the fall of a city that has withstood so many kingdoms?" Isaiah kept silent. He knew disbelief was always more comfortable than fear. But in the year when the rains failed, and caravans stopped coming and trade began to dry up, the first whispers arose. When the Assyrian army descended like a storm, no one laughed anymore. Years later, one of Isaiah's disciples walked among the ruins sprawling where proud Damascus had once stood. The wind stirred tattered curtains in empty windows. Dust rose in whirlwinds, covering ancient inscriptions with a film of forgetting. "It all came to pass," the man whispered, "all of it word for word." Beside him, another disciple picked up a pottery shard with part of a royal name still visible. "And even so," he said, "no one believed until they saw it." The first took a deep breath, clutching the scroll wrapped in his cloak. Isaiah said it would be this way, that only the humble would heed the warning before it was too late. When they returned to Jerusalem, they found the prophet sitting in the temple courtyard. The setting sun lit his face, marked by years of scorn and loneliness. "Did you see?" Isaiah asked without moving. "Did you touch the charred stones?" "Yes, Master," the disciple said. "Everything was as you foretold." Isaiah lowered his chin. His gaze seemed to lose itself among the paving stones. "Then write," he said. "Pride goes before destruction, arrogance before the fall." The disciple wrote every word with trembling hands. When he finished, he lifted his eyes. "Was that all?" he asked, just so everyone would see the prophet was right. Isaiah raised his face, and for the first time in a long while, his eyes shone, not with sorrow but with a hope no conqueror could erase. "No," he said, "it was so they would know that no judgment is final, that from the dust, repentance can still be born." The disciple fell silent, the scroll still damp with ink. The wind blew, gentler now, as if wanting to sweep away the ashes and make room for something new. But Isaiah knew Damascus was only the first chapter. Other kingdoms, other cities, other generations would drink from the same cup. Damascus was only the beginning of a cycle no one would stop, a cycle that would reach the ends of history. It was dawn when the first scouts appeared on the horizon, small silhouettes approaching in the mist, like shadows cast by the future. They carried no banners, but Every man on the walls felt that familiar stab of dread in his chest. The march of armies always began this way, with silence and distance. Then came the standards, the trumpets, the clatter of shields, and finally the roar no wall could contain. Isaiah was already awake. He had spent the night sitting in the shadow of the temple, eyes open as if keeping watch over dreams. When a guard ran to him, breathless, pointing toward the valley, the prophet didn't need to ask what was happening. "It's them," he said simply, "those who were meant to come." The soldier swallowed hard. "How many?" he stammered. "How many are coming?" Isaiah lifted his face to the brightening sky, the wind stirring his robe. "As many as needed," he replied, "because it's not the number that matters but the purpose." When morning overtook the city, the rumor had already spread. In the markets, no one bought. At the gates, no one passed. Children clung to their mothers. Older men climbed the towers, searching for signs to confirm their darkest fears. Isaiah walked among them slowly, as if each step marked a rhythm only he could hear. He stopped at the main gate, where the commander of the guard was poring over maps with a vacant expression. "Where do they come from?" the man asked without lifting his eyes. "From the north, the east." Isaiah placed his hand on the parchment laid out before him. "From every place," he said. "The east and west will unite against this city like two arms of the same judgment." The commander closed the map, his breathing heavy. "Then there was nothing we could have done to prevent this," he whispered. Isaiah took a deep breath. His voice was so calm it almost sounded like an insult. "You did everything," he said, "everything that draws the weight of God's hand." At dusk, the first standard appeared around the bend in the road. It was black cloth embroidered with a figure few recognized, a lion with flaming eyes. Behind it, columns of men marched in rhythm. The noise of sandals, metal, and voices grew like a rising tide. The walls filled with watchers. Some princes came to the parapet, faces pale. When one of them saw the prophet, he raised his voice. "Isaiah," he shouted, "are these the armies you foretold?" The prophet didn't take his eyes from the valley. "They are," he said, "and each of them carries the seed of something greater." The prince clenched his teeth. "Then they'll bring destruction upon us." Isaiah closed his eyes for a moment. "They'll bring revelation," he replied, "because when everything falls, you'll see who you truly are." The drums began at nightfall. 3 beats, a long silence, then another strike, deep like thunder that needed no sky. Each note seemed to pound inside people's hearts. In the market, women fell to their knees, clutching children to their chests. In the palace, counselors looked at each other, knowing no alliance would be enough. On the walls, young guards exchanged glances that confessed fear no speech could erase. Isaiah turned to his disciples, eyes inflamed with tears that wouldn't fall, harder than stone. "Write," he ordered. "Behold, the Lord summons nations from afar. Their warriors come in wrath, and their hearts know no mercy." The scribe dipped his pen, hands trembling. "And afterward," he whispered, "will there be peace?" Isaiah took a long breath. The wind carried the scent of evening, mingled with hay and the sweat of approaching armies. "Afterward," he said in a tone that was both promise and threat, "there will be truth." When night fell, campfires lit the entire valley. The red glow painted Jerusalem's walls as if the fire had already begun consuming everything. At the top of the tower, Isaiah stood unmoving. His disciples, seated behind him, didn't dare ask what he was seeing. Perhaps it was better not to know. The drumbeat sounded again. This time, no bird took flight. Even the shadows seemed to hold their breath. Isaiah bowed his head. His robe fluttered in the wind like a banner of another kingdom, the only one no man there could fight. "When you hear this sound," he said without raising his voice, "remember that you were warned, and that every seed sown in pride blooms in the hour of siege." The disciples lowered their faces. One sobbed silently. Another clutched the scroll to his chest as if the written word were the only refuge left. In the valley, the armies kept advancing, step after step. The march wasn't swift, it was unstoppable. And the thunder drew nearer, like a storm ready to prove that no wall could protect hearts hardened by pride. Dawn crept slowly over Jerusalem. There were no thunders in the sky, no lightning tearing the clouds. And yet the whole city felt something rising on the horizon, more powerful than any storm. Zion, the sacred mount, lay under a solemn twilight. The temple rose there as a witness to ages that came and went. All around it, the walls were lined with guards, and every flame burning in the braziers seemed more fragile before the darkness gathering. Isaiah climbed the stairs leading to the upper court. His steps were slow, as if each one carried centuries of memories. When he reached the top, he stopped. For a moment, he didn't speak a word. His disciples came close behind. The youngest lifted his gaze to the temple lit by the last torches and whispered, almost reverently, "There, that's the heart of everything, isn't it?" Isaiah didn't answer right away. He only gazed at the bronze gates, so ancient they seemed to have been set in stone before any king dared raise a throne. "It is," he said at last, "because Zion isn't just a mount. It's the point where past, present, and future meet." The older disciple bowed his head. "Then that's why," he murmured. "That's why so many nations long to take it." Isaiah took a deep breath. When he spoke again, his voice sounded heavier than ever. "They desire the symbol," he said, "but they could never bear the meaning." Along the eastern wall, soldiers stood in line with spears raised. Torchlight cast strange shadows across their faces. Some stared into the valley with blank expressions, men who dared not imagine what was coming. When Isaiah walked among them, no one dared ask anything, but all turned to follow him with their eyes. His presence was a living reminder that prophecy didn't sleep. Reaching the last parapet, he stopped. The wind rose from the plain like a warning. The invaders' fires multiplied, so many they looked like fallen stars scattered over the earth. The commander of the guard approached, helmet hanging in his hands. "Prophet," he said in a voice filled with respect and dread, "they're ready. Everything is prepared for the attack." Isaiah kept his gaze fixed on the valley. "Ready they are," he answered, "but they don't know why they came." The commander swallowed hard. "They came for glory, for conquest," he tried, "or for the gold of Jerusalem." Isaiah slowly turned his face. Torchlight drew deep shadows across his features. "They came because God allowed it," he said, "to weigh hearts, to fulfill cycles, and to remind the world that Zion is the center of everything." At dawn, thick mist covered the plain. The sun rose like a pale disk, unable to pierce the fog. From the mountaintop, the sight was even stranger. It looked as if the city were floating on a sea of gray cotton. "It's as if we're suspended outside of time," the young scribe whispered, "as if the world itself paused to see what will happen here." Isaiah didn't look away. "Because that's exactly what it is," he said. "The world always turns to this place, and what happens in Zion echoes to the ends of the earth." The older disciple stepped closer, scroll pressed against his chest. "And after this day," he asked, "will there be any Jerusalem left to tell the story?" The prophet took a deep breath. The mist carried a chill that sank into the bones. "There will always be a Rem," he replied, "because God didn't write this city's name to be forgotten, but it won't be the same Jerusalem as yesterday." At midday, the fog began to lift. First the spears were revealed, then the standards, then the columns of war chariots advancing as one body. And that was when Isaiah saw not just an army of men, but the fulfillment of everything he had spoken on nights of scorn and laughter. Every soldier was the seed of something much greater, a destiny no one could interrupt. He closed his eyes. For a moment he seemed as tired as a man who had crossed millennia. "Right," he told the scribe. "The Lord has gathered the nations against Zion. not for its utter end, but to reveal who will remain when all is shaken. The young man lowered his head, tears falling onto the parchment. Then he whispered, "There's nothing more we can do." Isaiah lifted his face, his eyes burned. "You can always choose," he said, "between arrogance and repentance, between fear and trust." The thunder of drums broke the afternoon silence. The sound rolled through Jerusalem's streets like a caged storm. Every man, every woman understood, even if they couldn't admit it, there was no more time. But before the first battering ram struck the gate, Isaiah lifted his arms one last time. "Zion," he cried, "this is the day you will know who sustains you and who tests you." And from the east, a force unseen until now was rising, one that would mark the beginning of the greatest confrontation in history. When the thunder of drums fell upon Jerusalem, many thought nothing could be worse. But Isaiah knew that true fear came from where few dared to look, the east. While legions marched from the ends of the north, another power was awakening, slow, ancient, like a beast that had hibernated beneath the dust of centuries. It was Persia, old Persia, heir to kings who had humbled entire empires and subdued nations with a single decree. The news first arrived as rumor. A merchant brought word from Damascus of armies gathering in forgotten fortresses. Another claimed Persian generals were buying weapons by the thousands. For weeks, people thought it was gossip, until the caravans stopped coming and the borders lay empty. Isaiah climbed to the temple terrace at dawn on a murky day. The wind blew from the east, carrying a bitter smell like fire. His disciples huddled beneath heavy cloaks, but he stood upright, gaze fixed on the horizon. "This is how it begins," he said without turning. "Not with a trumpet, but with the silence that comes before the first shout." The youngest scribe, fingers stained with ink, approached carefully. "Master," he whispered, "is it true what they say, that the kings of Persia have raised their standard again?" Isaiah took a deep breath. The breeze struck his face like a warning. "It's not only true," he replied. "It's necessary, because every cycle of pride sleeps, but it doesn't die. And when it wakes, it comes back 7 times stronger." At midday, rumor became confirmed report. Messengers from Tyre, covered in dust, rushed to Jerusalem's gate. On their lips was the news no one wanted to hear. "The Persian armies have taken the fortresses of the royal road," one cried, voice cracking with exhaustion. "They march with thousands. They say there will be no truce, no treaty." The commander of the guard leaned on his spear, face pale. "But Persia has slept for generations," he murmured. "What woke them?" Isaiah descended the temple steps. When he stopped before the men, his face held the serenity of one who had seen it all before it happened. "Pride calls to pride," he said. "Violence calls to violence. Israel's arrogance has awakened the arrogance of the East, so it has always been." The messenger fell to his knees, tears mixing with dust on his face. "Then there's nothing we can do." Isaiah knelt until their eyes were level. "There's always something to do," he said, "but it's not to build higher walls. It's to raise hearts in repentance. No human arm will hold back the fury rising from the east." By evening, the news had spread through alleys and squares. Some wept, others cursed God and the prophet. A few prayed silently, as if understanding there was no refuge left but mercy. Isaiah returned to the terrace. His oldest disciple followed, carrying a prepared scroll. "I'll write it all down," he said. "Every word, because one day they'll ask why we weren't warned." The prophet laid a hand on his shoulder, gaze heavy with sorrow and tenderness. "Then write," he murmured. "The Lord has raised from the east the power that will judge the nations. He called them by name, though they don't know him." The scribe lowered his head, pen shaking in his hand. "Why us?" he whispered. "Why is it always Israel that becomes the point where everything comes together?" Isaiah looked out at the city, glowing under the twilight. The golden rooftops gleamed, but he saw beyond them. He saw the pride that wouldn't yield, the hearts that wouldn't break. Because this place, he said, is the center of history, and nothing that happens here is small. Night fell with cold winds. On the distant plain, Persian campfires appeared one by one, like embers burning across the land. They looked like eyes watching Jerusalem, reminding everyone that the old enemy had awakened. The youngest guard climbed the battlements. When he saw Isaiah, he knelt, helmet in hands. "Prophet," he said, "if they truly come, who will dare stand against them?" Isaiah didn't answer at once. The wind lifted his cloak, raising it like a banner without color. "No one," he said at last. "No man will dare, but God doesn't hide even before the mightiest of powers." The guard lowered his gaze, clutching the helmet to his chest. "Then we're lost." Isaiah turned his eyes eastward, where the fires multiplied. "Not lost," he replied, "but tested." When the last glow of twilight died, the city seemed to shrink into itself. Generals withdrew to their councils. Priests closed the temple gates. And in the humblest homes, families gathered, wondering whether the new day would bring peace or the sword. Isaiah remained there, alone until the wind ceased. And in that deep silence, he felt the heartbeat of something not human, a promise older than every siege. Persia was rising again, and no wall would be enough. The night that fell over Jerusalem felt heavier than any before. The wind from the east carried a cold that froze the soul. And even though the walls still stood, every man watching from their heights felt the same premonition. Time had fractured. Isaiah walked across the temple's inner court, his sandals echoing over stones. His steps were slow, almost reverent, as if he knew he would never see that place the same way again. All around him, lamps burned, casting shadows that danced across cedar walls. He stopped before the altar, took a long breath and lifted his face. The embers flickered inside the bronze hearth, reminding him of how many generations had laid down sacrifices there, pleading for blessing, for victory, for more time. "Time," he murmured to no one but himself, "always time." Behind him, the young scribe approached cautiously, scroll clutched to his chest. "Master," he whispered, "they say plagues are spreading through the fields, that cattle die for no reason, that the harvest rots before it ripens." Isaiah turned slowly. Torchlight made his face look even more severe. "Because the clock of the Most High isn't measured in seasons," he said. "When he decides to raise his hand, all things rush toward their appointed end." The scribe looked away. His fingers were trembling. "And us," he stammered, "will we be counted in that clock too?" Isaiah reached out and laid his hand on his shoulder. "All of us will," he replied. "No one can escape the reckoning that weighs the heart." The next morning, the news came with the same cold indifference as always. New plagues had appeared in the south. The springs that fed Jerusalem's cisterns were drying up without explanation. The air felt thinner, thick with dust that settled in the lungs. The commander of the guard came to find the prophet in the court of the Gentiles. His eyes, once proud, were hollow with exhaustion. "The men can endure no more," he said. "The supplies are gone, the morale is gone, everything is falling apart." Isaiah lifted his chin, cloak stirred softly. "What falls apart was never solid," he replied. "What endures no hand can uproot." The commander lowered his gaze. For a moment he seemed just a man, stripped of armor and authority. "Then this is it," he murmured, "the end." Isaiah didn't look away. "No," he said, "it's the beginning of revelation. When the clock strikes for the last time, every man will know who he was and who he only pretended to be." By midday, columns of smoke began to rise. They came not only from ruined fields but from villages burning in chaos. Some families abandoned their homes, seeking shelter behind the walls. Others remained, as if preferring to die on their own land rather than beg for refuge. From the western tower, Isaiah watched in silence. His disciples sat behind him, so still they seemed to have forgotten to breathe. "Do you see?" he said without turning. "Every flame is a warning, every plague a sign. Every stroke of this broken clock tells you the count is ending." The elder scribe clutched the scroll to his chest. "And if there's still repentance," he whispered, "will there still be mercy?" Isaiah closed his eyes. The wind brought the bitter scent of burned wood. "There's always mercy," he replied, "but it doesn't cancel the harvest of what was sown." That afternoon, an old priest climbed the tower, leaning on a worn staff. "Isaiah," he said, voice unsteady, "I remember when you were just a young man, your eyes full of fire. You always proclaimed these disasters, always warned that a day like this would come." The prophet turned to him. His face held no anger, only exhaustion as old as the world. "And even so," he said, "you never believed." The priest took a long breath. "Because believing hurts," he confessed. "It hurts more than denying." Isaiah lowered his head. "Now the pain is no longer a choice," he said. "It's a sentence." When twilight came, the temple bell rang 3 times. It was the signal that no one would leave the walls that night. The city shrank into its own fear. Every home was locked. Every heart beat to the rhythm of an invisible clock, knowing there wasn't much time left. Isaiah remained on the tower until the stars appeared. Then he raised his arm and pointed east. "Write," he commanded the scribe. "Thus says the Lord, behold, I count your days as one counts grains in a sieve, and when the last falls, nothing will remain hidden." The scribe traced the words with a trembling hand. Then he lifted tearful eyes. "Master," he whispered, "when this clock strikes for the last time, will there be any refuge?" Isaiah didn't answer at once. The cold wind brushed his face. Then, in a voice gentler than on any other night, he said, "There will be one refuge, the truth, but few will seek it." And when it struck for the last time, there would be no refuge, only the testimony of what each had become. The night was leaving Jerusalem with a slowness that felt almost merciful. On the walls, guards stood motionless, eyes fixed to the east, where the line of the horizon grew paler with each passing moment. Isaiah climbed the steps of the tallest tower before the first gleam broke through the darkness. When he arrived, he found the youngest watchman, a boy with narrow shoulders and a face as pale as the retreating moon. The boy didn't turn when he heard footsteps. He kept staring into the distance where shadow and light met. "You haven't closed your eyes?" Isaiah asked, voice soft as a breeze. The young man swallowed hard. "No," he replied without looking away, "because if I sleep, it might all end before I see it." Isaiah stepped up beside him. Together they watched the sky brighten. For a moment, no words were needed. The cold wind brushed their cloaks. The city's banners fluttered like candles about to be put out. "Sir," the watchman murmured, "how much longer?" The prophet closed his eyes. It was the question all Jerusalem held in its heart, but few dared speak aloud. Even he felt the weight of the answer rising in his soul before it could be spoken. "Only the last light remains," he said, "and after that, nothing will stop everything from being fulfilled." When the line of the sun appeared, it didn't bring relief. It brought revelation. In the distance, the columns of Persian soldiers shone like blades, the gold of their shields, the rhythmic movement of their standards. Everything seemed orchestrated to remind those who looked that no wall would be enough. The watchman shivered. "There are so many," he whispered, "more than I've ever seen." Isaiah didn't look away. "They're only men," he said, "but they carry the weight of centuries. What we see today didn't begin now. It's the harvest of seeds sown generation after generation." The young man wiped his eyes with his sleeve, as if wanting to clear away not just fear, but helplessness. "And why us?" he asked. "Why this mountain, this city?" Isaiah took a deep breath. "Because Zion is the center of history," he said, "the place where God chose to weigh the hearts of men." Below, the commander gathered his officers by the gate. Every face wore the same expression, resignation. There were no more strategies, no hope of reinforcements. Only time remained, and everyone knew time was running out like oil in a cracked lamp. "Guards," the commander shouted, "prepare yourselves. No one leaves their post. No one yields." Isaiah descended the tower stairs. As he passed the group, all fell silent. Their eyes turned to him, waiting for a miracle, for a new prophecy that might undo everything. But the prophet's voice offered no easy comfort. "The light that comes," he said, "is not just the sun. It's the moment when every mask falls and every heart reveals to whom it truly belongs." A heavy silence fell over the courtyard. The scribe who was writing everything down lifted tear-filled eyes. "And afterward," he asked, "when the truth shows itself, will there be time to go back?" Isaiah laid a hand on his shoulder. "Afterward," he replied, "each will stand before what he chose." The light spread across the fields, touching first the raised spears, then the helmets, and finally the endless line of war chariots. The brightness seemed to consume the very color of the landscape, turning everything into a single brilliance that hurt the eyes. The watchman climbed the wall again. When he reached the parapet, Isaiah was waiting, unmoving. "Do you see?" the prophet asked. The young man nodded. His voice came out as a thread. "Yes, I see." "Then write it upon your heart," Isaiah said. "When the light arrives, no one can hide." In the marketplace, doors slammed in the wind. Some mothers shut the windows. Others knelt beside their children, whispering prayers they might never have spoken before. In the palace, the king remained in absolute silence. Before him lay a map marked with red, showing how many outposts had fallen. His fingers traced the parchment as if searching for some point that wasn't yet lost. "Bring Isaiah," he ordered at last. But the prophet wasn't there to attend councils at the last hour. He was atop the tower, gazing east with the serenity of one who already knew the ending. "Sir," the watchman said, voice breaking, "is there much longer?" Isaiah turned, and for the first time he smiled, not with joy but with compassion. "Only the last light remains," he repeated. "After that there will be no more doubt, and that will be more terrible than silence." The young man closed his eyes. A tear slid down his cheek. When he opened them again, the first trumpet sounded in the distance, and it was about to be heard, announcing that the time for questions had ended. The highest hall of the palace was crowded. Chandeliers cast golden reflections over tense faces, but most of the men gathered there struggled to appear confident. Between cups of wine and embroidered cloaks, the atmosphere wavered between bravado and hidden fear. Isaiah stood in the doorway for a moment, watching. There were faces he had known since youth, generals who boasted of old victories, princes who had never faced a real enemy. And there were also the most dangerous ones, the counselors who laughed quietly, convinced that every prophetic word was nothing but theater. The first to see him lifted his chin and tried a disdainful smile. "Ah, the prophet," he said, raising his cup. "Have you come to tell us everything will end tomorrow, or would you rather pick the date of our funeral?" Some laughed, others only looked away ashamed. Isaiah walked to the center of the hall. His cloak trailed dust that stained the polished floor. When he stopped, no sound dared cover his voice. "You who laugh," he said, voice firm. "You're like men dancing over an abyss, convinced the ground will never give way." One of the generals snorted. "Always this gloomy poetry," he replied. "Always this veiled threat. If your warnings were true, we'd no longer be standing." Isaiah raised his eyes. The torch flames reflected in them like embers. "You're not standing by merit," he said. "You're standing by mercy, and it's reaching its limit." The youngest prince, whose face hadn't yet learned to hide fear, clenched his hands on the table. "Then tell us," he whispered, "is there still hope, or does your mouth know only sentence?" The prophet took a long breath. His shoulders felt as if they carried the weight of the whole city. "There's always hope," he replied. "But it's not in the walls, nor in treaties, nor in treasure. Hope lives wherever there's a heart willing to bow." The eldest counselor struck his staff against the floor. "We will never bow," he shouted. "We're sons of David, this city will not fall." Isaiah turned slowly. His gaze met the man's without wavering. "Then you've already fallen," he said. "There's no fall greater than that of a heart that never learns humility." The hall filled with whispers. Some tried to protest. Others remained silent as if shame were greater than fear. Isaiah raised his hand. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, yet carried a force no shout could match. "Hear this word," he said. "When pride becomes a wall, judgment comes like a battering ram. When arrogance becomes a throne, truth comes like flame." The scribe who wrote down every syllable on a scroll, resting on his arm, swallowed hard. "Master," he murmured, "can we still turn back? Can we still change?" Isaiah closed his eyes. A single tear traced down his face, so discreet only the disciples saw it. "You could have," he said. "But with every counsel, every laugh, every cup raised against the word, you cast stones into your own future." The general who had mocked struck his fist on the table. "Then tell us," he growled, "when will your great punishment come? When will everything collapse as you so wish?" Isaiah turned to him. His eyes held no joy, only the pain of one who bears a truth no one wants. "I don't wish for ruin," he said. "I wish that you would wish for repentance, but the time given to you is running out like oil in a cracked lamp." The youngest prince leaned against the wall, face buried in his hands. "Why?" he groaned. "Why do we always prefer to laugh instead of listen?" Isaiah walked to him and laid a hand on his shoulder. "Because listening hurts more than illusion," he said. "Because truth demands a price no proud man wants to pay." Silence fell over the hall like a heavy veil. Even those who had laughed felt something break in the air. Outside, the first light of morning touched the tops of the walls. The light was no longer just brightness. It was a warning. The scribe lifted his face, tears falling onto the parchment. "And now," he whispered, "what remains?" Isaiah lifted his eyes to the ceiling carved, with symbols of ancient victories. "There remains a choice," he said, "between silence and confession, between bowing the neck or watching everything shatter." The eldest counselor clenched his fists around the staff. "And if we will not bow," he spat in a thread of voice. The prophet turned to him as one looks at an already open grave. "Then your names will be remembered," he said, "but not as examples, as warnings." The wind entered through the half-open door, extinguishing half the torches. For an instant the hall was left in twilight. No one dared light another flame. And the chance to change was almost lost, but no one there wanted to confess it aloud. The sound began before the sun rose. A long, deep cry that seemed to rise from the bowels of the earth. Those sleeping in humble houses woke in fright. Those keeping watch on the walls looked at each other as if wondering whether it was allowed to feel fear when you held a spear. Isaiah was standing by the valley gate. His disciples were just behind him, faces white as lime. When the cry came again, a little louder, the young scribe shivered. "Master," he murmured, "what sound is that?" Isaiah closed his eyes. The wind from the east brushed his face, carrying dust and omens. "It's the call of decision," he said. "The trumpet that announces that nothing can be held back any longer." The commander of the guard came running down the inner stairs, helmet hung under his arm, face aged by a single night of watch. "Did you hear it?" he asked Isaiah, unable to hide the tremor in his voice. "They say there are more than 20,000 men posted on the hills." The prophet didn't answer at once. He kept his gaze fixed on the line of earth that separated the valley from the slopes. There, where the mist was rising, the sound of trumpets continued, a lament that wasn't human, yet seemed to be born from every heart. "The number doesn't matter," he said at last, "because this call doesn't announce only a siege. It announces the moment when every man must choose who he is." The commander wiped his face. When he spoke again, he was just a tired man. "Then there's no truce, no offer of peace." Isaiah lowered his head. "There was," he said, "but not on the battlefield. It was offered on the field of pride, and it was refused." The trumpet sounded again, now so close the walls trembled. Some children began to cry in the alleys. Animals stirred in their pens, and a different silence fell over Jerusalem, the silence of those who finally understand that the choice was made long before that dawn. The scribe clutched the scroll to his chest. "Then is this the end?" he whispered. Isaiah turned slowly. His eyes held no anger, only an ancient sorrow. "No," he replied, "it's only the beginning of revelation." On the plain, torches multiplied. One by one they appeared, like constellations across the earth. Among them, the trumpets raised their cold voice, calling men to witness what they had chosen. The youngest prince came running from the palace. When he saw Isaiah, he fell to his knees in the dust. "Forgive us," he cried. "Forgive us, prophet, is there still time?" Isaiah knelt too. He laid his hand on the prince's head. "There's always time for repentance," he said, "but not to undo the consequences." Guards hurried through stone corridors, handing out arrows and shouting orders that sounded fragile against the trumpet's call. The gates closed with groans that sounded like lament. Isaiah lifted his face to the walls. Beyond the parapet, he saw the first banner emerge from the mist. It was black, embroidered with the emblem of ancient Persia, the lion with eyes of fire. The scribe took a deep breath. His pen trembled as he began to write. "Behold, the nations rise against Zion, and no one will silence the sound of their march." The commander came close again. "Can you still intercede for us?" he asked. "Can you still ask your God to stay his hand?" Isaiah turned. His eyes seemed to reflect the whole dark sky. "What needed to be spoken has been spoken," he said. "What needed to be warned has been warned. Now every man will reap what he has sown." In the distance, the trumpets rose in unison, a chorus so vast it seemed impossible it had been prepared by men alone. The prince lowered his face, sobbing. "Then this is it," he murmured, "the sound no one can stop." Isaiah laid his hand on his shoulder gently. "This is the sound that echoes," he said, "and no wall, no gold, no strategy will silence it, because it's the sound that announces the time has come." The trumpet sounded again, louder, so close it seemed to vibrate in every man's chest. The scribe stopped writing. He looked at the prophet as if searching for a final word that might bring comfort. "Master," he whispered, "when all this ends, will there be a tomorrow?" Isaiah lifted his face to the hill covered with banners. His lips moved in a whisper the wind carried away. "There will be," he said, "but it won't be the same." And no one could silence that sound, because it was the herald of judgment and the possibility of redemption. The first blaze wasn't from the sun. It was from flame, a torch hurled over the southern palisades that in moments rose into a living inferno. The fire climbed with a roar that silenced trumpets, stilled commands, and made even the bravest warrior falter. The wind from the east carried sparks as if the sky itself had decided to set the city alight. Isaiah was standing before the main gate when the glare reflected in his eyes. He didn't look away. His cloak billowed like the banner of another kingdom, the one no one wanted to admit existed. Behind him, the scribe fell to his knees, clutching the scroll to his chest like a useless shield. "Master," he murmured, voice breaking, "it's happening." Isaiah closed his eyes. He took a long breath. When he spoke, every syllable weighed like stone. "It is, and not because God delights in destruction, but because no seed remains buried forever." The commander of the guard ran to them, covered in dust and sweat. "We have to fight back," he shouted. "We must counterattack before it spreads." Isaiah turned slowly. His face was the very image of exhaustion. "Can you quench flames with swords?" he asked. "Can you bargain with the wind?" The man fell silent. His chest rose and fell, but no answer came. The fire advanced quickly. Houses built of dry wood cracked like breaking bones. Men and women ran through the streets carrying children in their arms. The temple bell rang without ceasing, a desperate toll that mixed lament and confession. From the top of the tower, the youngest prince was shouting orders no one heard. His hands shook so badly the sword fell to the floor with a sharp clang. When he saw Isaiah, he cried out through sobs, Why didn't we stop sooner?" Isaiah lifted his face to him. The flames lit his features, making the prophet look like a man made of light and shadow. "Because you believed the warnings were metaphors," he said. "But today, nothing is a symbol, everything is real." The scribe turned to the wall. The fire was already reaching the battlements. Chunks of burning plaster fell onto soldiers. "Isaiah," he whispered, "what should I write? What words can record this?" The prophet laid a hand on his shoulder, with a tenderness that hurt more than any rebuke. "Write," he said. "The fire came not for lack of warning, but for refusal to listen." A thunderous sound boomed. It wasn't a storm. It was the roar of collapsing structures. The noise spread like a war drum that couldn't be silenced. "Run," one of the generals shouted. "Get away from the walls." But Isaiah didn't move. His feet were planted on the ground like roots. When he turned his face to those who still looked at him, his voice sounded like the last word of an age. "Thus is fulfilled what was spoken. Thus is revealed what so many called a fable." The scribe fell to his knees, covering his head with his cloak. The prince let go of his sword and curled up beside the parapet. The commander dropped his helmet and closed his eyes as if waiting for the blade. And amid that chorus of weeping, Isaiah stood tall, not by strength but by faithfulness. When the fire reached the gate, a gust of wind scattered sparks across the square. Women screamed, children cried, and in the midst of the chaos, the prophet lifted his arms to the sky. "Lord," he cried, "let at least the humble find refuge." The glare lit every face. The fire climbed cedar pillars, devouring carvings and tapestries. The symbols of victory burned along with the portraits of kings. Isaiah lowered his arms, his eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. "Look," he said, voice almost a whisper. "When wrath descends, there's no boundary between rich and poor, between soldier and merchant. All become dust." The scribe lifted his head, sobbing. "And afterward," he stammered, "when all turns to ash, what will remain?" The prophet turned his gaze to the burning horizon. "Truth will remain," he said, "because when everything is consumed, what endures is what was real." The wind blew hard again. Sparks rose in a spiral as if trying to reach heaven. Some men fled. Others fell to their knees, but no one could pretend any longer that it was only a distant threat. The scribe dipped his pen into the inkwell. His hand trembled so much the lines came out crooked. "What should I call this day?" he asked. Isaiah didn't answer at once. The fire roared, the wall cracked, the bell kept tolling its lament. At last he said only, "Call it the day when wrath descended," and there was still a final truth, one that burned hotter than any flame. When the fire finally went out, it didn't leave behind the comfort many had hoped for. No cool breeze brought relief. No victory song broke the silence. The city remained still, like a body that had just exhaled its last breath. And yet, deep within each man, something whispered that it wasn't over. Isaiah was standing before the doors of the burned temple. The cedar gates were twisted, scarred by flames that had run along the carvings like serpents. For an instant, his disciples thought he might fall. His shoulders sagged as if carrying the entire weight of history. But he didn't fall. The scribe kneeling was gasping for breath. His cloak covered half his face, trying to filter the soot hanging in the air. When he lifted his eyes, he saw the prophet unmoving, staring at the blackened altar of ashes. "Master," he whispered, "and now, what remains after the fire consumes everything?" Isaiah didn't answer immediately. He drew a long breath and exhaled slowly, as if weighing every word before allowing it to exist. "What remains is what has always been hidden," he said, "because fire doesn't destroy the truth. It only burns away what concealed it." The youngest prince emerged from behind a broken column. His face looked like that of a lost child. He approached Isaiah with uncertain steps. "Then," he said, voice breaking, "is this the hour you spoke of? The hour when everything is revealed?" Isaiah turned to him. The dawn's glow made his tear-filled eyes shine. "This is the hour," he said. "The wind is already rising, and when it blows, it will tear every veil." On the eastern wall, a guard shouted. His arms pointed to the valley where a new column of dust rose. But it wasn't fire. It was movement. An army approaching, disciplined, unhurried, like a verdict walking on human legs. The scribe crawled to the parapet. When his eyes reached the procession of banners, his heart beat so hard he thought he would die right there. "Another siege," he moaned. "They're coming back." Isaiah laid a hand on his shoulder. "They're not coming back," he said. "They never left. They're part of the same cycle that began when the first king decided he was greater than the God who sustained him." The prince collapsed to his knees in the dust, hands pressed against his temples, as if to hold back the roar rising from his soul. "Why?" he cried. "Why did no one believe when there was still time?" Isaiah lowered his gaze. His fingers touched the young man's torn cloak in a gesture that wasn't reproach, but sorrow. "Because lies are sweeter than truth," he said. "Because pride is easier than humility." The wind began to blow. At first it was only a breeze, carrying the scent of churned earth. But with every second it gained strength, filling the empty streets with a sound like a groan. The scribe tried to stand but fell again. His scroll rolled across the pavement and came to rest at Isaiah's feet. "Master," he stammered, "what should I write?" Isaiah bent down and picked up the scroll. His hands trembled not from fear, but from reverence. "Write," he said, "when the veil falls, no one will say they were not warned." The wind grew louder. The banners in the valley waved like pale flames, and every face still breathing inside the walls understood without needing it explained. What was coming next couldn't be stopped. The commander of the guard appeared, eyes red with exhaustion. "Prophet," he said, "if you have another word, speak it now, because afterward there will be no ear left willing to listen." Isaiah raised his face to the pale sky. A single cloud, translucent like a veil, hovered over the shattered temple. "Hear me, all of you," he said, voice steady. "This is the wind that tears the veil. This is the moment when the heart of every man will stand naked." The prince lifted his face, smeared with ash. "And afterward," he whispered, "what will become of us once the veil has fallen?" Isaiah took a long breath. His eyes turned to the horizon. The light of the rising sun touched the banners, turning them into golden blades. "Afterward," he said, "each will know whether he built his life on stone or on dust." The wind roared again, louder. Bits of straw and ash flew across the square, tangling in hair, in cloaks, in outstretched hands. The scribe clutched the scroll to his chest. "Then," he murmured, "there's no way to pretend anymore." Isaiah closed his eyes. The wind whipped his cloak like a banner without a country. "No," he said, "because no one will be left without an answer." And the last illusion was about to fall, never to rise again. The wind ceased so suddenly that some wondered if the world itself had stopped turning. The entire city seemed to hold its breath. The embers in the streets released thin threads of smoke, rising into the now clear sky. It was then that Isaiah opened his eyes. His disciples felt that this moment marked something no one could fully describe. A deep cut between all that had been and all that was beginning. The prince, kneeling in the dust, lifted his face. His voice came out almost without strength. "Is it over?" he asked. "Or is the worst still to come?" Isaiah turned slowly. His eyes were so clear it seemed all fire and all shadow had been washed from them. "Nothing ends," he said. "It only changes its name. What you called calamity is only the beginning of revelation." From the top of the southern wall, a guard shouted, pointing beyond the valley. On the horizon rose ordered columns of men and standards, but they weren't only Persian armies. There were banners none there recognized, symbols belonging to peoples who until that day had remained far away, unaware of the old conflicts. Now they were all here, gathered as if some unseen power had summoned them. The scribe staggered to the parapet. His fingers clutched the scroll as if it were the only anchor holding him upright. "Master," he murmured, "what is this we see?" Isaiah took a deep breath. "It's the cycle completing," he said. "It's the harvest of what was sown before any of us were born." The commander of the guard appeared, helmet in hand. His face was stained with soot and tears. "They say Iran has risen," he said, "that its armies crossed the land with alliances no one foresaw." Isaiah turned to him. "I foresaw it," he replied, "because this isn't merely a war of men. It's a summons, a calling written before your thrones existed." The prince struggled to his feet. "Then," he whispered, "everything we've lived, everything that has burned, it was only preparation." "Yes," Isaiah said, "because every kingdom believes it can write its own story without giving account. But in the end, all find themselves facing the same horizon." The standards continued to grow along the edge of the land. Some guards climbed down from the battlements and knelt, dropping their weapons. Others remained standing, eyes glassy with fear. The scribe turned his face to the prophet. "Shall I write?" he asked, "even now when no one believes anymore?" Isaiah laid a hand on his shoulder. "Now more than ever," he said, "because one day they'll ask who warned them, who dared to say what everyone feared to hear." The young man traced on the parchment words that burned more than any flame. "Behold, the nations gather against Zion, not by chance, but by design, for everything that was hidden comes into the light." The prince closed his eyes, as if he no longer wished to see. "Then this is the end of our people," he groaned. Isaiah looked up at the clear sky. "No," he replied, "it's the end of illusions, but everyone who humbles himself will find life after the ruin." The wind returned, gentle, without the violence of the day before. But this time it didn't bring threat. It brought a different silence, as if the heavens themselves were waiting for the final choice. The commander bowed his head. "Then," he said, "what's our part? If nothing can stop what comes, why resist?" Isaiah leaned closer, until their faces were almost touching. "Resisting isn't trying to stop fulfillment," he said. "It's choosing how to stand when it arrives." The scribe raised the scroll, eyes wet with tears. "And when everything has been revealed," he whispered, "what will remain for us?" "The truth," Isaiah said, "and before it, each must decide whether to bow or to harden his heart." The horizon now glowed beneath the rising sun. The standards became clear. Among them, a black banner bore the Persian lion, the same that had haunted generations. But beside it, other symbols emerged, forming a chorus of powers that had once seemed separated by oceans and ages. "Look," Isaiah said, "the prophetic cycle completes. What men called myth is written upon the earth before all." The prince covered his face. "I don't want to see," he moaned. "I don't want to know we were warned." Isaiah turned to him. "But you were, and nothing is more terrible than realizing it too late." The wind blew again, lifting dust and ash into brief whirlwinds. Everyone there understood without needing explanation that no treaty, no army, no gold would buy even a moment's delay. The scribe closed the scroll, as if sealing a testament. "Then has the hour come?" he asked. Isaiah raised his arm and pointed toward the east, where the columns advanced with unstoppable steps. "It has come," he said. "Now each man will choose his path." And history had reached its climax, but no one could escape the moment when they would have to choose. The sun rose slowly over Jerusalem. There were no cries, no trumpets, no rush, only the heavy silence of a city discovering its true stature before the eternal. The walls, once so proud, were broken in places. The southern gate lay fallen like a dead beast, but there was something more striking than the ruin. It was the dawn. The light touched the shattered stones and made the dust shimmer as the wind lifted it in small spirals. The shadows that so often had seemed like giants now shrank into the humble outlines of what remained. Among burned beams and cracked blocks, a few wild flowers rose, stubborn, as if to remind everyone that life doesn't ask permission to return. Isaiah was standing on the broken wall. His cloak, soiled with soot, looked heavier than ever. His disciples were with him, some kneeling, others sitting, all silent. The youngest prince, face streaked with dried tears, lifted his gaze. Then he whispered, "Is this all that remains? Ashes and silence." Isaiah took a deep breath. The gentle wind brushed his face, marked by exhaustion and years. "No," he said, "this is only the beginning." The scribe, still clutching the scroll, lifted it slowly, as if offering one last question to the sky. "And what does one do," he stammered, "when everything once known lies on the ground?" The prophet turned to him. His eyes held no more anger, no more sorrow, only a clarity so ancient it seemed not to belong to this world. "You plant," he said, "because every ruin is also a field, and no broken stone keeps a seed from finding a place." Below, some women slowly came out of their houses, carrying children in their arms. The few animals that remained moved among the wreckage, sniffing for water and grass. It was a scene that mixed defeat and promise. The commander appeared at the foot of the wall. He walked as one who didn't know whether to kneel or stand tall. When he drew near, he lifted his eyes to Isaiah. "I know we don't deserve it," he said, voice choked. "But is there still any kindness left for this people?" Isaiah climbed down the broken stones until he stood face to face with him. His hand rested on the soldier's shoulder with a weight that was at once compassion and truth. "Kindness doesn't vanish," he said. "It only waits for contrition. When pride falls, it comes in through the cracks." The prince approached. His steps were unsteady. When he spoke, his voice sounded like it belonged to another man, a man finally stripped of any crown. "Then everything we lived wasn't just punishment," he said. "It was an invitation." "Yes," Isaiah replied, "a calling you ignored while the walls were intact, and now, without barriers, it can finally be heard." The wind began to blow again, but it wasn't cold. It carried the distant scent of fields wet with the first rain. The disciples felt a strange peace, as if the worst had passed, and something new was already stirring in the cracks of the ground. The scribe dipped his pen in the inkwell that remained. "What shall I write?" he asked. "What shall I call this day?" Isaiah lifted his face to the pale sky. The sun, though weak, seemed to promise another cycle. "Call it the day between ruin and seed," he said, "because everything that fell has made space for everything that will be born." The prince closed his eyes. A few new tears escaped him, but they weren't only of sorrow. "And if we choose to begin again," he whispered, "if this time we listen." Isaiah breathed deeply. "Then it won't have been in vain," he said. "Then the prophecy will have fulfilled its true purpose, not to destroy but to reveal." The few who were nearby drew closer. Some laid their hands on the prince's shoulder. Others bowed their heads in silent agreement. It was as if each man knew there were no more excuses, no time left to waste. The scribe began to trace the final lines on the parchment as the wind turned the pages, as if insisting on telling the whole story. When he finished, he held it up to Isaiah. "And the end," he murmured, May I write that it's over? The prophet laid his hand over the still wet characters. No, he said, because prophecy doesn't end when everything is fulfilled. It ends when the answer of every heart begins. The wind brought the gentle perfume of flowers blooming in the cracks. The sun rose another hand's breadth, and in the silence that remained, each understood that there was only one question that mattered. What will we do with everything that has been revealed? Because prophecy only ends when our answer begins. Listen, this isn't just an ancient story. This is a warning that has traveled through time to reach us today. The conflict between Israel and Iran that Isaiah saw thousands of years ago is unfolding before our eyes right now. Every prophecy, every warning, every word he spoke is being fulfilled. The question isn't whether Isaiah was right. History has already proven that. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you be like those in Jerusalem who laughed at the warnings until the walls were falling? Or will you be among the remnant who listened, who changed, who chose truth over comfort? If this message has stirred something in your heart, don't let this moment pass. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications so you never miss these revelations. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us what God revealed to you through this story. Because just like in Isaiah's time, we're living in a prophetic moment, and every one of us must decide, will we harden our hearts or will we humble ourselves before it's too late? The prophecy is being fulfilled, the cycle is completing, and your response begins now. 2 more powerful Bible stories appear on your screen, stories that will challenge everything you think you know. Click to watch them, subscribe, and let God speak to you even in the silence that comes before revelation. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May His face shine upon you. And may you have the courage to see what Isaiah saw and the wisdom to choose differently.